for today's session. I am going to pass it on to Manya, who will open the space for us.
Hello, and welcome to everyone who's joining us, who has been here. We value you, who is joining us for the first time. We're so excited. To the facilitators, everyone. My name is Tamania Garza. I am the National Director for PAAL of Community and Justice Initiatives. I'm also the Philadelphia Chief Rep. So I'm coming to you from the land of the Lenape people, whose historical territory includes the places colonially known as Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Long Island, and the lower Hudson Valley. For more than 10,000 years, the Lenape people have been stewards of these lands, as well as the river of human beings, or the Delaware River. Over the past 250 years, many of the these people were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands and dispersed throughout the country. Though some families remain, these families continue the traditions of their ancestors to this day. The violence that removed the Lenape people from their homeland is a powerful part of the history of Pennsylvania, and we acknowledge that in this moment we work and we live on these very lands. This is the story of our entire country. We encourage you to learn about the lands where you live and work, and the history of the people who lived there before colonization. Many still live there today, though they are often starved of the very resources they protected for so long, including access to housing, sustainable foodways, safety, clean water, and the land where they once lived with their families. This information was provided in part by www.lenape-nation.org. Also, while it is important to remember the history of this land, also many Indigenous people still remain in these communities. So please get to know your artists, your activists, and the families and communities on the lands where you live and work, so you can help celebrate in their joy, help them face their challenges, and return the resources that were stolen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamania, for that. And Rachel?
Yes.
To you.
Thank you for throwing it back to me. But Adriana, we're very lucky, is going to be staying on not only as the producer of the summit, but also as our featured speaker, because this is a topic that was actually why Adriana and I met in the first place as colleagues and started to connect over a shared passion to fight this discrimination, to find work-life balance. So I'd like to welcome everyone who is streaming with us or who is watching this back. This is a session on sex and pregnancy discrimination prevention. We're going to be talking about some essentials for staff training. One of the things that we've noticed at PAAL, and that we've said from the beginning, a big reason we started, is because while some support exists, it exists in pockets. And when it exists in pockets, discrimination is allowed to flourish in the big space in between. And one of the areas where discrimination is persistent and finds a lot of opportunity in the performing arts is with pregnancy and reproductive rights and sex and gender, which few people I've talked to know intersects sex discrimination and pregnancy discrimination legally, conceptually, and culturally. So to start off, I would like to invite Adriana to self-introduce and to share not only her role at PAAL, but also her role in the world at large, out in the union and out in our industry.
Thank you. So my name is Adriana Gaviria. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I have dark hair and I'm wearing a white top with some flowers on it and the PAAL logo behind me. I am a performer and a producer. And yes, Rachel and I connected on this passion a few years back. And during the pandemic, I was motivated by a suggestion of a friend. Someone recommended to my friend to run as a equity delegate, but they weren't available. And so they sent me a message and I said, I don't even know what that is. I have no idea where to begin. But I found a little bit more about it, that our union was going to have our first convention ever, and that there was an opportunity for us to make change within. And I had been feeling frustrated with a lot of the things that had been going on from a performer's perspective with my union. So I was motivated to run as a equity delegate I had never done something like that before. So it was a very huge learning curve for me, as it was for all the other delegates that were in a similar situation as myself. It was a very fast course for all of us. But what really helped the journey was that we were all researching at the same time and learning as much as possible. And the outcome of the first convention resulted in a lot of really great um, passing of resolutions and motions that were brought up by people that were feeling similar to me out of frustration. And one of these things was the Work-Life Balance Support Act that I proposed. And I'm really excited to talk about that here because that really blends in with the work that I was doing with PAAL. And I had just a fire inside me to really make this happen. It was a very personal journey for me. But yeah, yes.
Incredible. Yeah, I would love for you all to, this resolution passed with, I believe, over 95% approval at the delegation, which was really exciting. We had, some PAL think tanks around pregnancy and sex discrimination. And we had also, been chatting for years about it. But what Adriana did was invest in the legal research and then convert it to language into a resolution that would have not just the legal research, but also the language that the union can hear. So Adriana, the first question I'd like to ask you is, what was something that ended up in the resolution that either surprised you or affirmed you, or that you knew would end up in the resolution, but you knew would surprise other people about sex discrimination, pregnancy discrimination in our field?
Yeah, so something about the process and how we had to propose these ideas and these resolutions had very specific language. And first of all, English is not my first language, so to begin with. So that was definitely an adjustment of learning this new way of speaking. So there are whereas clauses where you are stating the reasons for proposing this. And I felt so I had all these reasons, right? But when you actually vote for the resolution, what really matters is what comes after that. So there are a lot of whereas clauses, and then it ends, therefore be it resolved. So the resolve clauses are really the important ones that you want to get in. And so there were a couple of resolve clauses that I was super excited that got in and that were passed, and that they were not divided, because when you propose something, it can be open to it being divided. And if it gets divided, then you start voting on each one separately instead of the whole thing as a unit. So this one passed in its entirety, which is great. So one of the things that I recommended was to prioritize education and training for staff, for business reps, for trustees, for all parties that are empowered to represent our members on legal rights regarding pregnancy discrimination and harassment and other forms of sex gender discrimination. I also was very interested because of my personal experience when I contacted the union. I was given wrong information, and I was given bad information, and I was guided in a very bad way. Basically, I was told that I would get fired if I was pregnant. So that was not the way that was handled was not. So I think it's really important that there is an onboarding process for staff, and because staff is constantly evolving, it's something that has to be repeated, right? It's just not one time. It has to be part of the onboarding process and checked in periodically to make sure that everything is still up to date. So something else that I learned is that each state is very different. Um, you're usually only familiar, right, where you reside or where you have family connections, or where you grew up. But each state has very specific laws. So that was a little bit that was a little bit challenging as well. Um, but as long as the training is up to date and you're keeping up with it periodically, you can really stay up to date with the stuff that's happening. And something, for example, um, that passed during the pandemic, really, because it was in 2020, for example, New York passed the infertility mandate, where everyone has now insurances. What There's always small print, right? But I was really excited about this New York State mandate, where insurances have to provide at least 3 cycles of IVF treatment. And a couple of things that were always barriers was age, or the type of unit that you had, if you're single or if you were not part of um, you had to be a male, female, married. So there was that, the age, being single, not being part of a heterosexual couple. And it was huge. And it was advocacy efforts that had been happening for many years. Of course, there's always small print, and I won't go into that, but that has been huge and has opened the doors for many people. So something else that was in the proposal that I was really excited about is the language that we use, and in everything, right? In audition notices, in our handbooks, in our code of conduct, in our posters, just something as simple as including and that additional tagline where it says, let me see if I have it here. And as far as pregnancy discrimination, including, I don't know if I have it here, but is expanding that tagline to include any pregnancy related issues, because it was too closed off. It was too limiting. So as long as you expand that tagline, it's just an awareness, right? And it creates that education for everyone that, oh, that is included in that. Oh, I didn't know that, right?
Yeah. So the EPO statement, right? Like, we do not discriminate against. And for those listening, we have a sample on the PAAL New Standard of Care where against race, gender, sex, there are some places that add parenthetically, including pregnancy, reproductive status, etc. And that parenthetical can and should be legally included after sex and the organization's commitment not to discriminate against that status. So including that in audition notices and casting and job descriptions, of course, outside. But for Adriana's proposal was a really specific move toward not only, doing the right thing, what's legal, but as she's sharing, when people read that, even when I'm applying for a job or I'm going to an audition, I read that and I'm being educated on what my rights are, which is huge.
Yeah. I just found the one that because I looked at different variations. And so the one that I landed on was including pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions. And I just that's the one that I gravitated to because I thought it was very, just included everything. And then the last thing that was I kind of went all out, right? I was asking for our union to continue championing our work-life balance and caregiving needs. And that includes wellness rooms, lactation rooms, that includes spaces for our infertility injections, for breastfeeding. And as things move forward, we also need to get feedback from our members, see what's working, what isn't, what are other things that are coming up for us. So those were all the things that passed. And now where we are in the process is, okay, how do we implement all of this? So yeah.
Pretty incredible, pretty outstanding work. And I just want to lift you up because this has been years in the making. And I want to always be transparent with folks in the room that these accomplishments are not overnight. And when we share that with the room, we mean it. And obviously, with the work that Adriana's put in, I would love for folks to enter into the chat because we're about to move into some summaries of essentials on what pregnancy rights are and how to prevent discrimination in the workplace, in particular the performing arts, because many resources don't know how to apply it to our industry that is very unique in so many ways. But I would love to hear in the chat either experiences you have had, questions that you have around this topic, and or solutions, positive examples that you've experienced in organizations or institutions. It could even be in the corporate world, because we learn a lot from how detailed they attempt to follow the law. It teaches us a lot on how we can create ethical culture that way when we at least learn that. So I'm going to share my screen here. After I pull up the article here, we're going to be walking through a bit of the resources on, I need to receive screen share privileges. I'll be sharing a bit on what's in our handbook as soon as I can around pregnancy hiring, firing, and discrimination prevention. And we'd love to hear what takeaways you have and what stands out to you in terms of your experiences in the industry. To start off with, we start the chapter with a quote that really lays a foundation for an understanding that I was never given. I didn't, to be quite honest with you, when I went to college, and Adriana and I had talked about this quite a lot, and even through grad school, I knew of Title IX, perhaps increasingly throughout my time there, but I didn't really know what it could do for me. I never felt that it was associated with things in my immediate or my future. I think things are a little different now, but part of that is the constant insistence on foundational education. So the quote here is, under the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, employers cannot treat employees affected by pregnancy or related conditions differently from other employees similar in their ability or inability to do work. Now, in just sitting with that language, how does that resonate with you working in the theater? It is a prompt I'd love to offer this space. I remember reading that and feeling, I mean, Adriana, how does it make you feel? There's an act literally designed around something that feels so far away from where our culture is.
Yeah, so we're still live and we're still streaming.
Mm-hmm.
But feel free to add stuff in the chat so anyone who's watching us in the live stream right now, if you want to join us here in the conversation, please go to paaltheater.com/summit, because we will be going off stream a little bit later on.
Yeah.
But yes, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, when I was researching for my proposal, I was like, what? How did I not know this?
Yeah.
I was angry. I was very angry.
Same. For while we're public, I'll be sharing some of these resources in the chat. My kids are home today. Perfect for PAAL Summit. Sharing these resources in the chat as well. But Work-Life Law, for anyone listening, is an incredible resource for lawyers who focus on pregnancy discrimination in the workplace. And a big reason why is we're interested in applying this to the performing arts because it's not a secret, at least at PAAL, and we're insisting on it not being a secret in the world, is that birthing people are still getting fired for being pregnant. And I think that that's a reality that we carry with us in this work a lot, and oftentimes it's illegal.
Rachel, something that you just said right now, which was
Yeah.
in the whereas clauses, right?
Yeah,
That there is an assumption that it's that this is a women's issue,
that's right.
but that is not inclusive of transgender and non-binary birthing people. So that's also very important.
Right.
But yes, when I found this out, I was really angry, and I mean, I was furious, and I couldn't believe the disparity of what I was receiving and the information that I had gotten from my experiences and from my union versus this. Because what I got specifically told was, oh, it depends on the theater, depends on the employer. Some artistic directors are a little bit more understanding and some aren't.
That's not sound advice. We talk a lot about how, especially for something where there are laws around this, for even our union staff and business representatives and general managers and producers and artistic directors to still leave reproducing bodies at the mercy of the lack of bias of whoever is in charge of hiring them is so dangerous and harmful. So these essentials that we're talking about today, number one, is that no institution or union should expect their participants or members to engage with an industry as a reproducing body with their fingers crossed. They should be equipped with the knowledge of the law, and our unions and our supervisors and staff should be able to hold decision makers accountable according to the law at bare minimum, not to mention the ethical and compassionate strategy. And we will save the chat for the Q&A, but please keep sharing your stories. For the sake of the stream, PAAL has collected stories over the years. We're going to be sharing a special project with you at the end of this session. And some of the quotes that have been shared with us is the longstanding advice to actresses about pregnancy has been secrecy and silence. This don't tell anyone mentality to protect your career in our industry has created a culture where women are left feeling alone, ashamed, and afraid of losing their jobs. I was told by 2 different companies, this person shares, that they wouldn't interview me while I was evidently pregnant. This was a stage manager, because what if the baby comes early or there are complications? I mean, really, what if I were hit by a bus, for Pete's sake? Where there's so much decision-making around fear, and none of it has to do with facts, even of the body. Yes, I would love for you to share a little bit before I share the resource around this conversation in terms of, you have the LTC, the Latina affinity space coming up. And in terms of, pregnancy discrimination and reproductive discrimination, in terms of essentials that people need to understand, what comes up for you for BIPOC folks and BIPOC bodies that reproduce.
Yes, I'm really excited about the Latina affinity space. We hadn't LTC really hadn't had that caregiving conversation in its convenings before or in their space. It was just something that hadn't been incorporated. And so when I was the lead producer for the Miami convening, I was really excited to be able to have that dream, right, come to fruition. And I asked Rachel if she could help me with that. And so Rachel and PAAL, a session was created during the Miami convening, and that started the conversation. of caregiving and all the challenges that we've been facing that we just haven't had a chance to share with each other, the struggles that we are under as an artist and balancing that work life. And then how to move forward that conversation. And so this affinity space tomorrow will be trying to drive that conversation forward, because many times, a lot of the responsibility falls on, I don't know if it's just the culture, but we take care, right? We take care of everybody. We take care of our aunts, of our uncles, of our grandmothers, or, our grandfathers. That's just the responsibility that we have. It's been my experience as a Latina. And so, but we don't talk about certain things, right? We don't talk about certain things. And then add on top of that, that you're an artist, and it's just very challenging. So as we navigate through these stages in life, it's really great to hear about, like, okay, what did you do when this happened? And then each experience is very different, because we had a great conversation last night in our session with elder care and other type of support, where the experiences are so varied, right? The caregiving is so varied. The time period, sometimes it's very short. Sometimes it's a very long process. Sometimes we're grieving not someone that's older than you, but also someone that left too early, right? And how do we navigate that? Because things sometimes take a really long time to process through, but it does help to talk with each other on, like, what you did, what tips there are, and how to prevent certain things. And I don't think that that's something that the Latino culture is very open about. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. And in my spaces with the Soul Project, I've tried in my own way as the producer of Soul Fest, which is a Latina theater festival. When I invite an artist to come work at the festival, and they tell me, like, no, I can't do it. No, the schedule and blah, blah, blah. And I have to take care of kids. And I'm like, no, I want this collaboration to happen. So how can we make it work? Does that mean we just only, rehearse, X amount of days? Does that mean that I push your slot to the end so that you have the weekend, right, with your family? Because, or, all these conversations should be, it shouldn't be like something unique or different that happens. It should be something that's common everywhere, and it's not. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited for that space. I'm really excited for that space and how you hold it. I'm putting into the chat the first essential that I shared only verbally. Apologies. So we were talking about legal. Where is pregnancy and sex discrimination prevention articulated in our organization? And thank you for sharing that, because then the next point is we're going to be talking about, as Adriana's stating, that how we support individuals who enter our spaces. Like she's talking about, as a producer, she has agency to create support in our organizations, who has agency to create protection around pregnancy and sex discrimination. And we're talking about this in terms of employment, right? At first, there's the EEO statement, and there's pregnancy and sex discrimination being articulated in the organization. But we need to continue to dive further to talk about how it impacts BIPOC communities, and investigate how is this piece being discussed in our anti-racism discussions. And a big point about that is that bodies who reproduce who are also BIPOC bodies are in some spaces not made to feel safe to the point of being in danger for their lives. And how we care for them in our work culture will make a huge difference in how they're able to continue working with us. So just some facts to jot down for your own company's buy-in and for discussion in your anti-racism groups. Black, Indigenous, people of color communities are most vulnerable, including during pregnancy in all systems: social, medical, economical, professional. This is from the CDC, where they share Black, American Indian, and Alaska Native women are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. So it's this question of how are we ensuring that we're giving the most care and support during pregnancy and reproductive realities. My copy isn't working, so I have to type these into the chat. Here we go. How are we centering pregnancy and sex discrimination in our anti-racism conversations? This next one. And Adriana, you touched on this a bit, but the next point being that pregnancy is gender inclusive. And, you know, I think what surprised some people about your motion was that it wasn't just pregnancy discrimination, and neither is the title of the session, but is pregnancy and sex discrimination. So in terms of some individuals prefer the term gestation to pregnancy and the advanced language around that. Can you share a little bit about the decision you made in including that, and how organizations can start to assess if their pregnancy language is inclusive?
Yeah, so when I was researching for this, I also, what was great about doing the research was learning different perspectives and reading about different experiences that I may not be aware of. And when I was writing it up, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so important to include here, because it really just affects everybody, right? And I know it comes up a lot, and it even came up when there's a period of time where the floor is open to ask questions about like how everything is written. That was a question, like what does sex discrimination mean, or why is that there? You know, that it's not only a woman's issue. It's not only about being pregnant. It's not about only for those who want to start a family. You know, it affects everybody. There are many different scenarios and many different perspectives. And it was really crucial for me to include it in there, because again, awareness, education, the more we talk about it, the more we provide examples, the more we're like, oh, okay, wow, I hadn't thought of that. And even just maybe this is kind of like off the topic a little bit with the question that you asked, but it's just little things, you know, like even in applications, right? When you ask, like, let's say you're going to a convening or you're going to an event, just even in the registration, right? Like what are your needs, right? What are you, or having a budget, like a caregiving budget line item. It just shows like the value, right? Like you're valuing the person, you're valuing the artist, as opposed to the set. So yes, so it was really important for me to have that language in there in that way, because there are many perspectives and many things that are incorporated in this thing, and it affects everybody.
Thank you. 3. Great. So the prompt for everyone is, how are we considering gender inclusion in our pregnancy and sex discrimination prevention language? And as Adriana is stating, it can be very simple, like changing, you know, mother's room to lactation space in our discrimination language, not categorizing it as a woman's issue or a woman's scenario, or that pregnancy discrimination is just about having a baby. miscarriage, IVF, reproductive status, there needs to be a wider scope there.
Yeah. And a couple more things. For example, like there kind of feedback or things that I've received, right? So there is that care when someone is pregnant, but then what about the aftercare? So that's something that as a producer also like hearing what your needs are. You may not be physically ready for stairs. You may not be physically ready for certain things. So how to take care, how to listen to what the needs are and then adjust. Not be like, no, I'm sorry, we can't hire you. No, like I want to work with you. So how can we make this happen? Oh, let me get an Uber or a Lyft, so we can make that happen. Let's do rehearsals in a building that has an elevator, so like, so there is that aftercare also that takes place. Yeah. Also, like I know, it's there, you can be at a different stage. There's something that happens before a baby is born. There's so many stages of life. And as a person who's trying to make that happen, there's loss, right? That happens before that. And so that grieving that you may have during that period before there is actual life is also something that is not talked about a lot. And one can feel very alone in that grief, because since there was not ever a baby at the end. So that's also something else, a care that I feel is really important to acknowledge, during rehearsal or when you're doing a show, if that happens, during that. So how do we really take care of it's not it's not always visible. The challenges, the grief, the frustrations are not always visible.
Two things, and I promise we're going to give some of our tangible thinkers. I'm going to give you your list. I'm going to give you a list of discrimination. I'm going to give you a list of solutions, I promise. But this is really, really important to make whatever lists or resources we give you have the impact I know you want them to have. Our industry, and I hear you, our industry treats pregnancy like they still believe in the stork, like a big bird comes into your window and drops off a baby and then they drop your contract. It's like that to me, if I could encapsulate in a child's tale, what is pregnancy in the theater like? And to hear you articulate so beautifully, there are so many life stages and life events and care that happens before the baby piece is even part of the conversation. And a huge way to prevent pregnancy and sex discrimination, it's been seen and proven, is through education, like you're talking about. And part of that is being educated on the fact that this is a medical reality, that a reproductive body engages in medical realities that bodies that do not have the ability to reproduce go through, or the design to reproduce. Just quite literally stating there are going to be biological life events that happen, whether bringing a child into the world through pregnancy is part of the conversation or not. And if it is, I love this question that you're posing to us. How do we care for a person in all the stages before? And how do we care for a person in all the stages after whatever that life event may be? So this wasn't part of my list that I'm copying over to y'all, but that is the question in terms of an essential for preventing discrimination. How do we care for all the life stages that happen before and all the life stages that happen during and after? Thank you so much. After I share these lists, so you all know, we'll stop the stream, and those who want to join us, you can join us in the Zoom room, and we'll open up the chat for you to share questions you have on some of the legal essentials, personal experiences, anything that you want to identify, and solutions that you may have experienced.
A couple of things too before we go upstream.
Yeah.
For any producers or organizations or institutions that might be watching, is also like, for example, when there are certain treatments that you may, fertility treatments, let's say, that you're undergoing. The schedule is so sporadic and it's so inconsistent, and there's no heads up time. So a work culture that provides that schedule, that offers that, or that, you can have that. Sometimes you don't want to have that conversation, but knowing that you have a schedule flexibility, or to offer that to your artist is huge, right? Because not everything can be planned. So having flex time is really great. Most of those types of appointments, like for anyone who's going through IVF, you have daily monitoring appointments. And it takes a physical toll on you, mental, physically, everything, emotionally. So being able to offer stuff like that, or even Rachel, like you and I have talked about, which is strange, right? Because a lot of us have a community and have other people that we can like depend on, and friends and stuff like that. But sometimes you're alone, right? And you need like a medical escort to pick you up after procedure. So those are things that I'm always thinking about, right? Like, how can we incorporate those type of things in the budget? Like we've advanced, we moved forward and incorporating in our budget, like a caregiving budget. But what is a caregiving budget? Is it only babysitting? Or can we start to expand it a little bit more to start including all these other things too? Because there is more that we need to do.
Huge. Yes. And this work with you, and so folks know, Adriana is part of the shared leadership team at PAAL, is a big reason why this year our child care grants are not only caregiver grants, but there's a specific category for reproductive health support and postpartum care. These are grants to help subsidize the events that happen before, during, and after, that may have nothing to do with a babysitter. Actually, they have to do with the body and the person who is the caregiver. And we want to continually encourage organizations creating caregiver funds, as Adriana mentioned. It's such a good call, Adriana, in your itemization of access needs, how are we educating ourselves on pregnancy, sex discrimination, reproductive status, reproductive rights, to say, what can I learn about access needs that may be included under here for individuals who we want to make feel like they belong here? And this, this concept of a sporadic schedule, daily monitoring, there are echoes of this in foster care. There are echoes of this in adoption, that having a child, even if it's in the 1950s ideal handbook of just like, it's just a blossoming pregnancy and it goes, that has never been consistent. But that is such a rare experience, and that reproductive rights have to include an agency in how someone chooses to reproduce or not. And if we give that agency, how are we also giving support? That means we mean it when we give that agency. Oh yeah. Thank you for that, Adriana. So here are the lists that I promised you, and there are tons of resources that we'll send in our post-summit link dump. But in this chapter, there's a whole article on it here on 15 stories of discrimination types, but I will just read it to help invite anyone who wants to process their own story. And anyone listening, you are deserving of a healthy workplace where you can thrive without discrimination for your reproductive choices. Here are some examples that have been shared with us. Call it of discrimination. Colleagues express directly or indirectly that they expect the pregnant person to disappear from the field. Fired without reasonable accommodations or mediated problem solving. illegal questions in interviews, work opportunities intentionally withheld, toxic language. Colleagues express directly or indirectly that they expect the pregnant person's professional capability to decrease. Left off the list for professional consideration. Colleagues will challenge their choices / question their work-life plans. Remove professional agency and decision-making at work. Betraying a right to privacy. Perpetuating silence through microaggressions, macroaggressions, or lack of dialogue altogether. Expected to prove professional relevance or capability, lack of training or education of colleagues or their union without information to support them, burnt bridges as a result of having to turn down a job, and perpetuating shame culture on parents and people who reproduce. So those are just samples that we've been able to gather. And I think our industry has accepted it as so common that it's just part of the job. Like you shared, they're like, well, this person that you spoke to, Adriana, knew enough about pregnancy in the industry to know that some artistic directors are cool with it and some are not. But we don't know enough to know that's illegal. And the question is like, how much work can we do to make that shift? So the next list I will share for a resource for everyone here before we jump off stream is ways to support. And we want to jump into these so that anyone on the playback can see it. Educate your staff on how to legally and compassionately support people as they experience abortion, pregnancy loss, fertility care, and other reproductive realities in the workplace. Educate staff on the racial, gendered, and socioeconomic class implications of lack of support or selective support in family planning and family formation. Create a written policy for your organization, committing to legal and ethical protection of pregnant people, family planning, family formations, and individuals with family responsibilities. Create legal, ethical, and compassionate mediations and conversations that center the needs of the pregnant person or reproducing body over the organization's preconceived vision. Make legal rights and resources readily available and visible for all staff and freelancers. Prioritize the real human over the character human in performance, and real human over the to-do lists or productivity flow in production. Create a list of reasonable accommodations to have on hand to support physical changes, list of low to no lift jobs for crew, list of due process for pregnant performers, including how you will advocate for them to other individuals, such as the playwright, director, producer, etc. And there's more provided there.
Rachel, one thing that I also wanted, that just popped in my head, that I'm like, oh, I need to say this before we go off stream, which I've found fascinating too, is the sex discrimination, regarding the sex discrimination question, were assumptions that are made based on stereotypes and roles. So like assuming, for example, that as a father of a child, you don't need certain things, right? Assuming that as, just those assumptions that can be made. And that was another reason why it was important to include the sex discrimination. Oh, you're muted.
I said absolutely. And there's very clear sex discrimination that happens to women where they're assumed to have children. And I want to voice that as well. And we're totally against that being anyone's business, and not part of workplace discussion for it to be supportive. And that's exacerbated by a culture that does not have an education on these resources and what discrimination looks like and what support looks like. And we're about to go off stream to have that conversation with people in the room. What does discrimination look like and what does support look like? And we'll provide these resources in the chat. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us. So we'll be going off live stream. And like Rachel said, stay tuned for